This is Norman Bates. I've been on a bit of a kick with the Psycho franchise recently after my girlfriend convinced me to watch Bates Motel with her. We were hooked instantly and we binged the show over the course of a few weeks. Naturally, I wanted to see the origins because I had not actually seen the movie in its entirety. I had seen bits and pieces here and there. I had seen a cable edited version, probably like the first half of the movie, and I had seen parts of the Vince Vaughn film. But I had never actually sat down and enjoyed Hitchcock's masterpiece all the way through the way it was intended. I watched the original movie a few more times, and the first time I had the opportunity, I picked up a copy of Psycho 2. Now, for sake of transparency, I have not seen Psycho 3 or 4. I have only seen Bates Motel, the original film, and Psycho 2. I also have not read the books, so the references and comparisons I make will be rather limited in comparison to someone who has delved deeper into this franchise. Also, I will not be doing a full review of this movie, as there are probably hundreds that are already produced, probably better than I could do. So this is how this is going to go with this video and the other videos in the In Defense Of series. I will start off with some of the criticisms that I have or I have heard elsewhere, and we will work backwards from there to try to point out what any particular piece of media does correctly, or at least it does well enough. Now, without further ado, let's get started. Even though this movie is 4 decades old, I'm going to issue a spoiler alert. I personally think this movie has one of the most fan service, tacked on, and out of place endings I have ever seen in a movie. My girlfriend could vouch for this. I was staring at the screen in disbelief for the last few minutes of the film up until the credits rolled. The film had spent somewhere in the ballpark of an hour and a half making us question what is the reality not only for Norman but for the characters around him. And while I do appreciate the fact that they did not simply take the lazy way out and just leave these as loose ends, did they really do us any sort of favors with the ending they decided to put in the film? They spent over an hour and a half making us feel sympathetic for Norman, believing he has made a change, and at the last moment they have him commit a murder and go right back to the behavior that led him to be institutionalized in the first place. He makes mention of his real mother a few times throughout the movie, but I feel like the way they introduce her character at the very end was somewhat of a fumble. It might just be me, but I felt like it was incredibly stupid and did not fit the rest of the film at all, especially considering it essentially retconned one of the more mysterious figures in horror film history just for the sake of fan service, and not even good fan service.
Oh, wait! We're on PlayStation 3!
There are plenty of strange and questionable elements to the story, but I find the most egregious to be the incredibly elaborate setup for Lila, who is the sister of the shower scene murder victim in the first movie, to have her daughter working at the same diner where Norman is going to get a job once he's released. Now, bonus points for stupidity going to the fact that the woman, who is revealed to be his real mother, is also an employee at this diner. I watched the movie like 3 times over a 12-hour period to see if there was anything I missed, and I generally just found this to be a stupid plot point. Why go through all of the trouble to have this in motion if you were going to take a petition to the courtroom to have Norman continue to be institutionalized? Okay, what would have happened if the petition was actually recognized by the court and Norman was not allowed to return home? Was there ever actually a boyfriend that kicked Mary out? Was she actually even on the phone with anyone, or was she just trying to get Norman's attention? What would have been the role of his alleged biological mother if he would have never had the job at the diner? And last but not least, what if he took up the doctor's advice and did not return to live at the old home? There's just too many variables that make that whole setup just seem stupid. Now, the last negative point that I'm going to bring up is the egregious use of references to the first film. Some are more subtle, and some are nearly shot-for-shot copies. Some of them don't bother me as much, and I will speak for that later, but some of them just seem cheap. In fact, that's the biggest complaint I personally have with this film. Even though I enjoyed it overall, it is rampant fan service that goes a little bit too crazy and blurs the lines between a respectful homage and just blatant and lazy copying. For example, let's examine these 2 scenes real quick. They're pretty similar. Someone is inspecting the house to try to gain an understanding, kind of doing detective work, if you will, murdered at the top of the staircase by someone appearing to be Norma Bates. This may not bother some people, and like I mentioned earlier, there are some callbacks in this film that I find to be really tasteful. I just thought that one was cheap and kind of silly. With all that out of the way, let's defend Psycho 2. Remember before when I mentioned that some of the callbacks to the first film don't bother me? Well, this film starts off with a replay of the famous 1960 shower scene using the actual footage from the first film. You could easily consider this to be cheap fan service, but it's important to remember that the sequel was canonically 22 years after the first movie, and in the real world was actually released 23 years after the first movie. And personally, I feel like replaying one of the most iconic scenes in film history kinda does a favor to this film for a few reasons, and one of them is narrative-based. The biggest benefit from this is giving you a reason for Lila's emotional explosion in the opening court scene. It gives context to her character arc throughout the film and also reminds you what this franchise is built upon. I also really enjoyed seeing the conflict Norman feels when he sees or holds knives, or when he finds the implied poison that he used to kill his mother. You also see his growth as he struggles with deciding whether or not to put Mary in cabin 1 at the hotel. In case you have forgotten or don't know why this is important, cabin 1 is the one with the peephole looking directly into the bathroom from the back office. This is an example of a callback used in a constructive manner, as we see Norman does not want to return to his old ways, and they do this so effectively visually that it doesn't actually require any dialogue to show you this growth. It's also incredible that they were able to retain a few of the original actors from the first movie. The sister, Lila, the victim of the famous shower scene, and Norman Bates himself, Anthony Perkins. If I'm missing anyone else, please let me know. This leads us to the direction, writing, and acting, which I believe is generally worthy of praise. I genuinely do believe that all the actors did a great job. Now, some of the lines coming from Mary are a little bit ham-handed in their delivery, but it services the story well enough to not be a problem. Verbal inflections, facial expressions, and body language are all used very effectively in this film, and all of the actors and directors deserve credit where it is due for putting their best performances possible into this film. One of the better performances, in my opinion, is also the shortest. Mr. Toomey is a complete scumbag, and this is established clearly by his opening dialogue, in which he is overtly accusatory as soon as he sees Mary standing in the hotel. He laughs and is genuinely unaffected by Norman's concern with the running of the hotel, and even goes to the diner where Norman and Mary work, harasses Mary, and threatens Norman into a fistfight after he has been fired from his job as hotel manager. His character arrives at the hotel later in the evening, clearly inebriated, and causes a scene, hurling insults and beer bottles towards Norman's house before he is murdered while packing his belongings in the hotel office. His character had minimal screen time and really didn't have much of a character arc, but the writing and acting was handled so well that you were able to dislike this character the moment he was on screen the first time. There are specific scenes in the movie where Anthony Perkins goes in and out of his persona as new Norman versus old Norman. And there's even a scene where he perfectly recreates the seemingly suspicious body language from the 1960 scene with the private investigator Arbogast and the current scene with Dr. Raymond. Throughout the course of the film, you see him go from gentle, nervous, and kind to paranoid, anxious, and insane, and for good reason. I believe Anthony Perkins did about as good of a job as anyone could with portraying a character with clear mental issues who goes through a series of truly inexplicable events specifically tailored to make him creep back into insanity. Another strength from this film is character development. You begin to actually feel sorry for Norman. Then you feel your trust, and then your distrust of Mary turn back into trust as you realize she genuinely cares about Norman and wants to help him, even to the point of defying her mother during a loud and nearly violent conflict in a hotel lobby. You feel that Sheriff Hunt is trying to do the right thing even if he himself is clearly greatly confused. You feel the genuine care and concern from Dr. Raymond, and personally I feel like the character of Lila is handled both poorly and very well at the same time. Her arc as the antagonist is obvious within the confines of the film, but you have to also ask yourself, would you not feel the exact same way if you were in her shoes? There is a push and pull with the emotions you feel towards her character, and I believe that to be brilliantly executed, not only by the film itself, but by the performance of the actress. There is genuine suspense, anxiety, and confusion throughout this film. This begins as soon as Norman returns to his home to see a figure looking at him through the curtains. This effectively sets the tone you will feel throughout the film. Is someone actually there, or is he imagining it? If someone is there, who is it? As soon as he arrives at the top of the stairs, he finds a note underneath the telephone that appears to have been left by his mother, and during a shared moment of confusion between both you, the viewer, and Norman himself, his mother seems to be speaking to him from her bedroom. She threatens to kill him in retaliation for poisoning her, and then her bedroom door opens, and you see someone's hand hit the ground, followed by the door closing, and Norman drops the suitcase down the stairs. The scene ends, and this is not investigated further, so at this point in the story, we don't know whether or not he is having some sort of guilt-induced episode or if someone is really in the home. I see this as a brilliant way to start the movie. You are completely baffled and have no idea what to expect from this point forward, but one of the major tones of the film is already set in stone. Again, you have no idea what's actually happening, what's real and what isn't. The filmmakers succeeded in making you feel the same confusion as Norman, making you relate to him. And this continues throughout the film. The notes Norman finds at work and throughout his home, are they even really there? Is there a reason we never hear a voice on the other side of the telephone? Is anyone even there? Who rearranged Norma's room and is standing in the window as he paints the motel? We just saw Mary leave with the doctor, so it's clearly not her, or is it? She later confesses to her mother that she was the one who locked Norman in the attic and rearranged the bedroom, so... The scene I just referenced, the scene where Norman is locked in the attic, he's locked in the attic by a door that does not actually have a locking mechanism installed. And this continues the trend of both us and Norman not knowing exactly what's going on. There is more of this peppered throughout the film, and if you watch for yourself, you'll probably find countless other examples. As far as suspense, I was at the edge of my seat during the scene where Mary is investigating the upstairs with her pistol. Although I expected it, I was still startled when someone looked back into the peephole as Mary was looking out. This is a very important scene, as it turns out Norman is clearly not the one on the other side, as you see him running up the stairs. And this also causes Mary to have doubts once she cannot reach her mother on the hotel telephone. Speaking of the peephole, earlier in the film, we notice someone watching Mary take a shower. It is implied that this is Norman, as while he is washing the dishes, he notices a decrease in water pressure from the sink, which would be evidence of the shower being in use. But just a few minutes later, we witness another murder. This movie makes very convincing and effective use of subversion and bait-and-switch storytelling. I was genuinely curious to know who was committing the murders because I found it to be perfectly clear from the beginning that it was not Norman. Somewhere around the midway point of the movie is where you learn there is actually someone else involved, not just Mary, Lila, and Norman. You, the viewer, and the sheriff suspected seemingly obvious foul play from Lila and Mary. However, you find out later in a conversation between the two that it was neither of them, despite their smokescreen of Lila not being available to receive a phone call from Mary in a previous scene. Your suspicion grows along with Norman as the doctor reveals who Mary really is. Even later than that, when Norman is nearly murdered by Mary, it is further proven that she did not commit the murders, as she is startled to see the corpse of her mother hidden under the window in a pile of coal. But unfortunately, all of this suspense is ruined by the absolutely terrible ending. However, while it lasts, it is real. You are genuinely at the edge of your seat, full of questions. I find it to be very well done the way that Mary and Norman's dynamic changes at the same time, actually. The trust shifts between the two, because at the same time Mary realizes there is another person involved, Norman has just learned that Mary is Lila's daughter. As I had previously mentioned, acting is one of the strong points of this film. Everyone takes what they were given and makes the most of it. The writing is also genius, with most characters going through somewhat of an arc throughout the film, and even if they don't, they're still effective. You see Mary go from visual discomfort, even blocking the door of the bedroom in Norman's house where she's sleeping, to totally trusting him and even lying to the police on several occasions to protect him. Lila's character is seemingly exaggerated and one-dimensional, but this is done as a means to subvert the expectations of the viewer, as we later find out she was not responsible for the murders. Somewhat predictable, but very effective, and with that we understand the essence of this film. Somewhat predictable, but very effective. Very good acting. And something I didn't mention previously is that the pacing of this movie is very well done and there are no wasted scenes. Everything pays off before the film ends, for better or worse. There are also a few examples of effective foreshadowing, such as the deputy suggesting Norman put a padlock on the cellar door before, and I quote, "someone robs you blind." In conclusion, is this a perfect film? Hell no, absolutely not. Is it to the quality standards of the original? Perhaps not. Is it absolutely terrible? Absolutely not. This is an enjoyable film, and I do believe that the good outweighs the bad. Now, while I do agree that the ending is absolutely ridiculous and leaves a very bad taste in your mouth, you cannot deny some of the great moments contained within this film. If I were to grade it, it would likely be somewhere in the 6 out of 10 range, or a C if I gave it a letter grade. It has some pretty clear and obvious shortcomings, but you're probably not going to want an arbitrary refund for the extra time that you spent with Norman Bates here. Also, if you are a fan of any of the Anthony Perkins Psycho films and you somehow have not seen Bates Motel, I cannot more strongly suggest it. At the time of this recording, it's the end of April 2020, it's available on Netflix in its entirety. Freddie Highmore does an absolutely incredible job as Norman Bates. Review on that coming at some point, and thank you for watching.